Greetings. I wanted to read something from Oswald Chambers, a favorite author of mine, and it's taken from Genesis chapter 3 and verse 8, and make some comments about it. Genesis 3:8 says, "And they heard," that's Adam and Eve, "the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day." Until Adam fell, he was not interested in God. He was one with God in communion. A person is never interested in that which he or she is. When Adam fell, he became so appallingly interested in God that he was afraid of him. Quote, "And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden." Unquote. Sin finds us severed from God and interested only in anything we can be told about him. Consequently, there is an element of fear. When we become children of God, there is no fear. As long as a child has not done wrong, it enjoys perfect freedom and confidence toward its parents. But let it disobey, and the one it disobeys becomes someone in whom he or she is interested, with an element of fear. Conscious piety springs from being interested in God, or in other words, concerned about God. Overly concerned. Quote, "I want to know whether I am right with God." Unquote. If you are right with God, you are so one with him that you are unconscious of it. The relationship is deeper than consciousness because you are being disposed or managed by the very nature of God. It's a fascinating story, isn't it? The thought of God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. I come back to these accounts again and again and again, and I'm just in awe of the profound nature of these stories. So much has been written about the early chapters in Genesis. Different positions are taken by different scholars and Christian teachers, and perhaps one of the greatest questions is pertaining to the genre or the nature of the material we're dealing with. It's safe to say we're not reading material as we would read a morning newspaper. This is different material, and at this time I will hesitate to label it, but we're dealing with something that is so profound and so deep and spiritually true. It really does take the Spirit of God to translate it into our limited understanding and life situation. I'll just note some things and make some comments if you'll allow me. They heard God walking in the garden. Of course, my mind goes to questions like the sound of God walking. I think of like walking through leaves in the autumn. I would play golf and lose my ball oftentimes in the leaves, and you would hear the rustling of the leaves as you're walking through the course, and of course you walk in your yard and you hear little sticks crackling. They heard God. Now this is again after they fell. There's another tremendous issue. They fell. Well, that has to do with them, of course, taking the forbidden fruit. Of course, they didn't fall literally like stumbling on the ground. They fell spiritually. Well, what is that about? Perhaps we could equate it with falling away. You know, we had a falling out, we say, which has to do with separation, doesn't it? We know the story tells us that they were told they can eat of all the trees of the garden, but not the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And they didn't listen, did they? And they rebelled against God. What are we to make of that? Is that historical? Is that literal? In one sense, and I agree with Alistair McGrath on this, a British scholar and pastor. In one sense, it is to be taken historically. In another sense, it is not just simply historical, it's stereotypical, which is to say that in some sense, it speaks to all of us. In some sense, in our natures, we've all fallen away. As Adam sinned, we all sinned. We've all shaken our fist at God. We've all turned our back towards God. We've all eaten of that fruit that we were told we cannot eat. And we've had our falling out with God. This is the beginning of the understanding of the gospel. The gospel carries with it good news and bad news. The bad news is we've all been alienated from God because of our sin. We are all separated. We've all had our falling out with God. I was conceived in sin, says David. From the time of my birth, within my very being was this corrupt nature. Even as a child, I didn't want to do what I was told. I can say that of myself, can't you? And Chambers is saying here, he wasn't Adam, Eve. They were not really interested in God in the sense of being overly concerned about things. You know, things were moving along swimmingly. Things were fine. Until they disobeyed. Every time we disobey, there's a problem. If we live in a state of disobedience, there's a problem. You know, if I'm breaking the law, I get real nervous when I see the police car. If I haven't done anything wrong, I really shouldn't be overly concerned when I see the police car pull next to me. We're all a little nervous, I suppose. But there's no real concern, is there? Not if I'm doing as I should be doing. But Chambers goes on to say, when he didn't listen to God, he was appallingly, in other words, horrifyingly interested in God. Ever a night where you just can't sleep because you just know there's things in your heart that are so wrong? You're married, your partner, your wife, your husband might not even know about it, but you know about it, and you know God knows about it, and you toss and turn, or you lied to someone and it was awful. It makes you even sick to your stomach. It's awful. He goes on to say, sin finds us severed from God and interested only in anything we can be told about him. I've been reading Chambers for many years, and I have to interpret him. I think what he's saying here is, let's see if I can draw a comparison again back with the policeman. I'm not interested necessarily in what he has to say, but I sure want to know where he's at. I better have my radar detector working properly. I want to know where he's located. I want you to tell me about him factually. I want to know what he's about, but I don't want to deal with him directly. It's the way it is with God, isn't it, sometimes? But you know that, as he goes on to say here, and and he's right about this, and I think he's referring to the Apostle John. I see the wind's picking up here, so bear with me. I think he's referring to the Apostle John in his epistles, where he says, perfect love casts out all fear. He says, as children of God, there is no fear. Now, that's one of the great blessings that you and I can experience when sin is addressed and dealt with and confessed and forgiven. And it's forgiven on the basis of Jesus' atoning work on the cross. When that's dealt with, there is no fear. Are you afraid of dying? Are you afraid of the possibility of judgment? Well, one says, I don't believe in that. That's all Christian nonsense. Is it? Jesus certainly spoke of it in very lucid terms. He said one day he is going to separate the sheep from the goats. The sheep are the righteous, the goats are the wicked. Paul made it clear that one day we'll have to stand before God and give an account of our deeds. We'll have to explain why we didn't listen. And there will be no explanation, really. The relationship with God, as he says here in his own unique way, when it is right with God, as he says here, is deeper than consciousness. I think what he's saying there, and it's easy to, I think, oftentimes use illustrations. It's like with our parents. When I was, 5 years old, I didn't worry about my mother and my father. I never gave a moment's thought to our relationship. And what a joy that was. Kids have it so good, don't they? In certain cases. You can just be happy as long as mommy and daddy are there. I think what he's saying, it's the same thing with God. We don't have to worry about God crossing our path in the garden in the cool of the day. And it's the cool of the day now. The trees are blowing. It's getting cool out. It's September now. I don't have to worry about God crossing my path. Just like I didn't have to worry about my mom and dad. Now, if I did something wrong, yeah, I was very alert. My dad wouldn't just threaten. He would follow through if need be. He didn't have to do that much, but he would do it. He could do it. And I hope that you know the peace where you can sit in the garden, walk around, and not be afraid. Blessings.